So happy to be here with Doctors JJ and Desiree Hurtak. They are leading spokespeople in the field of UAP contact, disclosure, the awakening of greater consciousness. So, Doctors Hurtak, start maybe with you, JJ. What was your first contact experience and what happened? How did it change?
In 1973, as a young scholar teaching ancient languages, the texts of the Middle East, known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, as well as the Oriental texts, specifically the Bhagavad Gita, the Sanskrit text, I was in a quandary as to what was the reality behind these ancient texts. Namely, were there avatars, were there beings of light, were there higher angelic forms of intelligence? And so I was searching deeply through prayer. And I, having musical ability and training, began to synthesize certain mantric expressions, the names of God. And at a certain point, a morphogenic field was open with my voice and my intention. And through this field, a tremendous light force appeared in my bedroom. And out of this greater light we call superluminal light, a face appeared. And I was asked the question, was I ready? And I intuitively, mentally said I was. And that light was then extended around my body. I was biolocated into another dimension. And that reality led to the publication later of a book called The Book of Knowledge Keys of Enoch, which was a ultraterrestrial experience, not an extraterrestrial experience. And this is why I have worked behind the scenes all these years, more in the area of paraphysics, parapsychology, and spiritual cosmology.
But who was that face, or what was that face that appeared to you?
That face was a face telepathically mentioned as Enoch, also known as Enoch in the Hebrew, Idris in the Arabic, one who initiates into light. Beyond that initial experience, all I can say is a whole new reality appeared to me of vast extensions of knowledge, scenario abstracts, and expressions that I will call represent a language of light, a higher language communication system, which I've illustrated in my other books.
Beautiful. How about you, Mrs. Hurtak?
I grew up in the area of Miami, which as a young child, I realized was more than just a solid landmass. I had friends that actually were marine biologists that were doing experiments in the oceans and had come across an extraterrestrial base, which I wrote about in the book, Making Contact. In addition to that, when I was about 16, I also looked up and saw my own experience of a flying saucer. So when I came to meet my husband, as a young student, he was my professor, I already understood half of the experience he had because I understood the grids of the planet, I understood the cosmic dimensions. But he actually was taken even farther than most people I've ever even heard of. He was actually taken into the higher heavens. So he saw things not only past, present, and future on the planet, but he also saw things in a cosmic, much higher dimension. We'll call them the throne worlds.
Talk about what you saw around Dr. Hurtak's body when he came back, as you were on the future notice.
Well, like Moses, strange enough, where there was beams of energy coming out of his head, Dr. Hurtak had beams of light coming out of his eyes. He also, as many of his students recognize, we also together had experiences of, we'll call them light vehicles. We wouldn't call them metallic spacecraft, but light vehicles that would appear to all of us when we would go out at night and do sacred mantras.
So what was your message or Enoch's message to humanity? What was the purpose of this contact?
The message was very clear. Namely, our scientific community was drifting towards the destruction of our planet, biospheric collapse, the destruction of humanity that we as a humanity would have to understand our inherent gifts of the mind, we would call higher gifts of consciousness. In biblical terminology, the gifts of the divine or Holy Spirit. And that would awaken humanity to make dialogue or enter into dialogue with the cosmic cultures.
I think we're seeing this now. Dr. Hurtak also was told that 64 areas of science would take a quantum leap. And we're seeing this now with being able to control aspects of light, understanding the power of photons or sound, understanding really cosmic dimensions. In fact, quantum computers are starting to look at what they call parallel universes. I mean, this is all too strange in the 1970s. But he came out with this information that these things would take place. We would have a better energy technology, even bordering now on zero-point energy, those kind of concepts of being able to use like the Alcubierre engine of going through time warps and wormholes. So all these aspects are coming to us now. And the interesting thing is that he was told this information is pouring forth to our planet to advance us. And that means ultimately, and we've seen this because we also live part-time in Silicon Valley, that scientists are actually getting information in their sleep, in their dreams, in their visions that are bringing us forward to what we need to know.
So what is your message to humanity via your experience and Metatron and Enoch? Tell us, the people.
Be prepared for quantum change. Be prepared to go from humankind to space kind. Be prepared to understand the divine spark which every individual has that can be cultivated through what I will call, in the keys of Enoch, acoustical physics, whereby both sides of the human brain, the male and the female, converge in poetic language, that the marriage of what John the Divine sees with the divine spirit residing in the human and the Christ ideal through which we are prepared for ascension or contact with a variety of worlds. Ultimately, we are to seek the highest level of love, of divine service and wisdom. And in this greater synergy, which is based upon the dynamics of breath, of language, of compassion, we are to emerge as cosmic citizens.
So, Desiree, you've been both traveling around with Alan Steinfeld.
Well, let me answer that question, then we'll get to that next one. Well, I often say there's 8 billion people on this planet, and the reason we're here now is because there is going to be cosmic contact. We're literally going to graduate from Earth-based reality to a cosmic reality. Dr. Hurtak often says from Homo sapiens to Homo universalis. So that's what's so exciting at this time. We no longer are going to be limited for various reasons to Mother Earth. And basically it's just time to move on. It's time to meet our brothers and sisters in space. And that's what we're on the verge of doing.
Right, so you've both been traveling around with Alan Steinfeld in his new book, Making Contact. But many people we've talked to, what have you noticed about the reception of contact with the people in the world?
Well, I think there was recently a study by a company called IASOS, so you'll have to confirm that. In 2023, the study said 46% of the population believes in UFOs, which I think is fabulous. In fact, I think there's really more, but a lot of people don't want to admit their true inner beliefs. So we're on the verge of contact. But then the question is, contact with who? Well, Dr. Hurtak's mentioned in a book called Extraterrestrial Species Almanac, with a new film coming out by that, where we're shared together. It mentions 80 extraterrestrial races. So obviously they don't have a common agenda. Although we believe, and Dr. Hurtak writes about in the Keys of Enoch, there is a galactic federation.
Right. The Keys of Enoch use that terminology. This is 1973. And illustrate, as I'm holding here from the book Keys of Enoch, one scenario of the biological wheel of life, showing the vast diversity, the biological diversity of life within our section of the local universe. What is important is that we were trained as social scientists in areas of linguistics, exobiology, the planetary sciences. And so this book, The Keys of Enoch, really is a blueprint of how we are to understand how our DNA, RNA, the biological code itself, is an emanation of the divine name, a higher language system which the ancient sages, scholars, prophets, and mystics understood can activate our body as a biotransducer, as a vehicle to process greater amounts of energy, information, if we are to be compassionate and love-based, recognizing that what is here on earth is also in the greater cosmos. And we have the privilege to work with those who are similar to us in terms of spiritual capacity to think on high levels, scientific understanding of how to bring science that is in concert and harmony with Mother Earth, and also to work in ecumenical unity of the various philosophies, theologies, cosmologies of how we are basically here to learn how to evolve the Adam and Eve story in worlds of the future. We are being trained essentially to problem solve under most difficult situations by taking the higher path.
And this brings us to the understanding of remote viewing, of which we've written a book with our associate Elizabeth Rauscher. Our consciousness actually is able to go into the local consciousness field, and in a certain sense, we get information from that field. And I believe that extraterrestrials also use that field. In fact, consciousness is not really located within us exclusively. It's part of a shared field. So when people have contact with other levels of intelligence, it's usually based on the energy of their vibration, of their thoughts, of their, we'll say, aspirations. Is it for the ego I? Then you're going to attract certain energy people and entities into your midst. If it's for the higher vibrations of light to help serve humanity, you're going to get the lighter, the more advanced spiritual energies. And so this is important to realize. We are not a cube sitting on planet Earth. We are energy beings, energy rays, and those vibrations go into the heavens. In fact, Making Contact says once you've even seen a UFO, you are entangled with that entity, even if you haven't seen the alien himself. There is a connection. We have to realize the entanglement that we are part of a greater universe.
So by background, we're very privileged to have worked with Elizabeth Rauscher, a great mathematician who has published more than 400 scientific papers, who worked with some of the best minds in physics. In this publication, Mind Dynamics, which is really the true X-Files of Stanford Research Institute scientists, we are privileged also to work with Dr. Andrei Puharich, leading scientist with Army intelligence in paraphysics, who in practical language was the Einstein of parapsychology and paraphysics. With this background, we were able to open other doors in conversation to show that we are being prepared on multiple levels to go beyond AI by realizing we have the potential without machinery, without technology, to use mind over matter signaling, but to use the gift of remote viewing, remote communication in distant parts of Mother Earth, and even beyond to our neighboring planets to see a little bit of the future. This is the most exciting point of the quantum change.
Definitely. Let's go a little bit back to when you mentioned DNA and the potential humans having the DNA and the possibility that some extraterrestrial races want to access our DNA. What do you think about that and the making of hybrids?
Well, we used to have a very good friend called Virgil Armstrong. In fact, he had worked one time with the CIA. He wrote a book, They Need Us, We Don't Need Them. Well, it was a very basic book, but we've developed that more and more, and so have other colleagues, part of the UFO research community, like Linda Moulton Howe. When she was looking at cattle mutilation and say, why are they mutilating our cows? What do they need that for? And she started to realize maybe it's the enzymes and the proteins that they're lacking. Maybe, they may want just a good steak, who knows? But the idea being that extraterrestrials, we believe, that have cloned themselves over an extended period of time, are going through what we would call genetic fatigue. That means perhaps they need more fresh genes into the gene pool of their civilization. This goes along also with a very good friend of ours, Elizabeth Klaar, when she had an experience in the Drakensberg of South Africa. Now, her book, Beyond the Light Barrier, details very specifically that the intelligence who took her, even though it was a type of love affair and she had a child with him, said very clearly that they needed fresh genes into their gene pool. They were very much like us. In fact, they said they've been around here, Mars, and even Venus, but they needed fresh genes. And so he had a special affair with her, and she loved him, he loved her, but it helped their civilization to prosper and survive.
So this really illustrates that we have to have a good selective factor in matching our genetic capacity with those who are visiting, some of who violate human free will and take our precious bodily fluids and do their own examination, experiments.
Without our permission.
Without our permission. And others who respect us, who will be able to download information into our mind so that we ourselves can co-create. As the keys of Enoch tell us, this is very important, key 202, the name of Yod-He-Vod-He, the 4 letters of the mystical name of God, is coded within every biochemical function in our body, especially within the life-giving DNA RNA matrix. So every part of our body has, in essence, a part of the divine script, a part of the pre-biological code that connects us with a higher language that is used in species management and navigation in the greater cosmos. We are one subset of a much larger evolutionary process.
This reminds me also of the experience of Dan Burrish, who was at Area 51. And he supposedly had direct contact, because he was a microbiologist, with an alien that was there. And he found, to his amazement, that the alien needed our help, that they were going through neuropathy, and they needed some of whatever biological enzymes functions within our body to help their civilization. In fact, the alien literally jumped on top of him and fed him pictures in his mind of their whole society and why they needed his help. Well, this is just showing you a little bit of what's out there. Now, we're not saying this is true for every species. We're saying this is true for some of the species who are coming here. There are others who are trying to help us and need us to understand to stay away from nuclear weapons. They've been flying over our nuclear weapons sites, and they've been neutralizing them in their silos, in many cases, in many places. So they're actually more concerned about how we are evolving as a species. And I believe those are the ones that are feeding scientific information to the scientists, say at Silicon Valley and many other places, to try to help us evolve.
I met with Dan Burrish in the room that Einstein used at Caltech. He was a private researcher, a molecular biologist who worked with the intelligence community. He invited me to speak with him. And I was surprised that under certain classification, he was allowed to meet with certain specialists in the scientific community and actually enjoy his research within the very room that Einstein used. He was interested in the keys of Enoch and the biological codes, which illustrate, as we will see in future books and documentaries, the greater tradition that we're connected with of what the ancient Greek philosophers called panspermia. The 2 words, pam means universal, sperm or biological factors of life that allow life to be genetically diversified throughout the universe.
And this gets us to the interesting question is, how did we get here and who are we? Yeah. And we believe we did not evolve from the ooze of the earth, but we are connected with other races in space, very similar to our genetic code. And what's interesting about that is if you go back even to the ancient times of the Bible, it says we were first in light garments and then took on bodies of flesh. And I believe this is why some extraterrestrial species, if you listen to the study of the Space Force General in Israel, Chaim Heshed, who said that extraterrestrials wanted us to discover, or help them discover, the origins of the universe. Well, why would you ask an Earth-based species about that unless we had a higher consciousness, unless we had a higher soul, and unless we can dream? I think many of these extraterrestrials, the ones that we're talking about needing our help, don't have the soul consciousness that we have.
So the bottom line is wisdom with discernment. With discernment, we can align ourselves with those who are physiologically, mentally, and spiritually in alignment with the positive direction of humanity.
Okay, 2 more questions. So are there hybrid human aliens walking around?
I believe when you look at the study of hybrids, you have to really redefine hybrids. I don't believe that there was some huge alien species that came down and took the ape or maybe root races, like the Neanderthals or something Denisovans, and made us into something more intelligent. Actually, if you go back to the ancient book of Enoch, you will find there was occurrences like this, but the flood actually came about to get rid of that species. So right now, at the time after the flood, we are a whole species designed as we were originally designed. We call it Adamic species, male and female. But that does not mean we are not thinking and connecting with other realms of intelligence. So you can have within yourself, from your own experiences, a connection to the Pleiades, or a connection to Arcturus, or even Orion. So therefore you're hybrid not in the genes as much as hybrid in consciousness.
But the aliens are making hybrids because they're genetic fatigue from our genetics. So are there hybrids?
Yes, there are humans in Brazil. I had the opportunity to work with General Alfredo Ochoa, who's even mentioned in the book by Luis Elizondo. This goes way back many decades. And we encountered hybrid beings that were part extraterrestrial and part human.
People sometimes see them on spaceships, but it's not like they're walking around here. The ones that are walking around here are usually those that can manifest in our form in some capacity.
The biblical scriptures refer to giants in the earth. Genesis 6, verse 4, Giborim, the giants. And if one goes to Switzerland, even in that facility formerly used by Erich von Daniken, one will see a picture, an actual reconstruction of a giant, 28 feet high. And my picture is connected with that giant reconstruction from a heel bone found in the country of Ecuador, along with a picture of a large footprint I'm next to in Africa. So we have clear evidence, biologically, in terms of social anthropology, of other earlier periods of history where these giants walk with us, where the small beings walk with us. And what we're seeing now in disclosure is nothing more than a repetition of what our ancestors wrote about. Our ancestors said no big thing. These giants or these small robotic life forms exist. We simply have to grow up and accept the fact that we live in a multidimensional universe.
Okay. How's it unfolding? What do you think is the best way? And we're in the midst of something. Where do you think we are now in the disclosure process?
Well, I love how Lou Elizondo said that disclosure is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so every little phase that's moving forward is pushing the government into a greater understanding and a greater awakening. And I say the government because I mean Congress, because they're the ones that need to awaken. There's certain government agencies that have known about this since, well, now we see Churchill, 1944. It goes way back to the cover-up. So how do you disclose this? I say there's 3 reasons for not disclosing cover-up. 1, it's been so long. There's so much that has to be disclosed, so many agencies that have covered this up, it's very hard to release it. 2, there's been technology that we've gleaned from it and are still gleaming. So why release that information when that kind of technology may stop? I mean, it's an amazing thing how much has come from back engineering. And the third is because of the 80 or so extraterrestrials. How do you explain that to the public? It's almost impossible for many people to grasp. Not only are we not alone in the universe, but we're not even close to being alone. There's tons of beings out there.
So disclosure must work on many levels. The technical, the actual evidence from ET retrievals, the biological specimens. It also must go into the psychological and the sociological dynamics of how a context society must be built throughout the world to accept the fact that we're not alone. And with this, there must be a new cosmology of consciousness, that we are not alone in the greater universe. A type of space law has to be engineered so that young lawyers, thinkers dealing with commercial law, dealing with space eventual realities are akin and prepared to work with. We have to have really the full 9 yards of a greater cosmology of consciousness if we are to really participate, co-create, and co-administer with the cosmic cultures willing to share with us.
But it's time now. I think we're ready for a rude awakening. How do you think it should proceed?
Well, this is what is called future shock. It's been held back for more than 8 decades. What we have really is a plethora of documentation from the evidences that have been collected. In my case, from Brazil, from Mexico, from other parts of the world. This information should be put on the table, as was done recently. In 2022, the BBC release of what picture I brought back from the Brazilian authorities of spaceships. We have to have documentaries. We have to have programs of education connected with the internet that can download quickly vast libraries of information so that young people can come to their own conclusion that we are being prepared to be cosmic citizens.
And I just want to say it's important to realize that maybe one of the reasons that's been put forth in some of the discussions is that they don't want us to know. The ETs don't think we're prepared because we are like apes whose favorite pastime is tribal warfare. That's something Stan Freeman talked about. Are we ready? Have we shown ourselves ready for cosmic contact?
Well, ready or not, here they come.